Everyone believed the billionaire's only son had been born completely blind, and for years no one questioned it. Not the doctors, not the staff, not even the father himself. But everything changed the day the new maid quietly walked into the living room and caught the father's fiancée doing something suspicious right before handing the boy his daily drink. What she saw made her freeze in place, and what she discovered later would uncover a hidden truth that had been kept secret for years. The boy's condition wasn't what it seemed, and the woman they all trusted had a reason to keep it that way. Before we continue with this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Oh, and don't forget to comment below where you're watching us from. We love to know that. Richard Hale was a very rich man who worked in the farming and food industry. After his wife passed away shortly after giving birth to their son Ethan, Richard chose to stay away from public life. He stopped going to big events and meeting people. He stayed in his large house, the Hale Mansion, which was always very quiet. The silence helped Richard think and take care of his son. Ethan had been declared blind since he was born. Many doctors had examined him, and they all said the same thing. Richard felt very sad about this, but he decided to do everything he could to help Ethan live a good life. He did not want to leave Ethan alone, so he changed his work life completely. The house was always calm, clean, and well-arranged to suit Ethan's needs. Every choice Richard made was to make Ethan feel safe and comfortable, even though the boy showed very little reaction to anything happening around him. Each morning, Richard helped Ethan move around the house. He would guide the boy with care, teaching him where things were and how to walk safely. He made sure Ethan knew the path from his bedroom to the living room and to other important places inside the house. Richard followed advice from experts who told him to involve Ethan in activities that used the senses of touch, smell, and hearing. He followed these suggestions seriously, even if Ethan didn't always respond. In the afternoons, Richard would read stories out loud, hoping Ethan would enjoy them or at least hear his father's voice. Sometimes he would place different objects in Ethan's hands, soft toys, textured balls, or musical items, to help the boy explore the world through touch and sound. Despite all the efforts, Ethan stayed quiet most of the time. He would sit on the same soft carpet near the window, holding either his small walking cane or a toy. He rarely said anything or moved much. Richard's life changed completely after Ethan was born. Before, he was a man who managed a big business, went to meetings, and made many decisions every day. But after his wife died, and with Ethan's condition, he felt it was more important to stay close to his son. He cancelled all his meetings and handed over many of his business duties to other people. He only focused on Ethan. Every day, he tried to spend as much time as possible with the boy. He didn't want Ethan to feel abandoned or alone. Richard knew that the outside world was loud and full of challenges, but he tried to make life inside the mansion calm and predictable. He believed that a steady routine might help Ethan feel less confused. Even though it was hard not seeing much change in Ethan's behavior, Richard never gave up. His love for his son gave him the strength to keep trying. He had a lot of hope, even if the progress was slow. The house itself reflected the new lifestyle. The big mansion was not lively like in the past. There were no guests, no loud conversations, and no music playing. Everything was done with care and silence. The people who worked in the mansion understood this well. There were only a few employees now, and they all knew not to disturb the quiet environment. They walked slowly, spoke in low voices, and never did anything noisy. Their jobs were to clean, cook, and maintain the house without drawing attention. They respected Richard's wishes and gave him and Ethan their space. No one asked too many questions. They understood that the family was going through something hard. The workers did their tasks carefully and left the rest of the time for father and son to be alone. This kind of quiet support made the house feel peaceful, even if it was sometimes lonely. Ethan's behavior remained mostly the same over time. He didn't show excitement or sadness. He would sit quietly for hours, facing the window as if waiting for something, or simply enjoying the warmth of the sun through the glass. Sometimes he held a toy, other times his white cane, but he rarely played or moved from his spot. Richard watched him often, wondering what was going on in his son's mind. He wished Ethan could talk to him or show some reaction. The doctors had said that children like Ethan might take a long time to react to the world around them. Richard tried to be patient. He reminded himself that every small moment, every time Ethan turned his head, reached out for an object or made a sound, was a sign of hope. Even if progress was slow, Richard stayed committed. His love never faded, and he promised himself that he would never stop trying to help Ethan connect with the world. The days in the mansion followed a routine that never changed. Morning walks around the house, afternoon storytelling, and quiet evenings where Richard and Ethan would sit in the same room, often without speaking. Even though there wasn't much talking, Richard believed these moments were important. He believed that just being there, close to his son, mattered. There were no exciting events or surprises in their daily life, but there was care and effort in every detail. Richard made sure Ethan's food was served at the same time every day. He chose clothes that were soft and comfortable. He checked the temperature in each room to keep Ethan from feeling cold or hot. Life in the Hale mansion was simple and quiet, but it was built around love and dedication. Richard didn't know what the future would bring, but he focused on the present. And in that present, his entire world was Ethan. Julia Bennett had been through something very painful. She had lost her newborn daughter, and the pain was still very fresh in her heart. Being around familiar places and people made the sadness even worse. So she decided to leave everything behind for a while. She needed to find peace and a new purpose. That's when she heard about a job opening at the Hale mansion. It was far from her old life, and she thought the quiet work might help her heal. She accepted the position as a housemaid, not because she needed the money, but because she needed a new place to be. On her first day at the mansion, a staff member welcomed her and explained how everything worked. The house had a quiet, serious atmosphere. She was shown where she would work and told about the house rules. Everything was calm and respectful. There was a strict routine in place, and she knew she had to follow it carefully without asking many questions. Later that day, Julia met Ethan for the first time. He was sitting near the fireplace. He wasn't doing much, just sitting still and holding his white cane. He didn't move much, and his eyes didn't focus on anything. There was soft music playing in the background. Julia didn't try to speak to him. She had been told not to interfere with the boy unless it was needed. She quietly did her tasks, dusting shelves, cleaning the floor, folding laundry, and avoided making any noise. Still, while working, she couldn't help but notice that something about Ethan caught her attention. Whenever she walked by, he seemed to make tiny movements. His head turned slightly, almost like he noticed someone was near. It was small, but enough for Julia to wonder if he was aware of her presence, even if he couldn't see. She didn't say anything, but she started paying more attention to these little reactions, curious about the boy's behavior. As days passed, Julia continued working in silence, but her eyes often looked toward Ethan. She noticed the same small movements again. When she entered a room, his head would sometimes tilt or turn just a little. At first, she thought it might just be a coincidence, but then she realized that it kept happening. Even though Ethan didn't speak or move much, it was clear to her that he was sensing something. Julia was careful not to interrupt his space. She respected the quiet nature of the house, and she never tried to start conversations or ask questions. But inside, she started wondering more and more about him. She didn't come to the mansion with the plan of getting involved, especially emotionally. Still, she found herself growing curious about Ethan. She noticed how he behaved at different times of the day and how he reacted not just to her, but to the sounds and movements around him. Even though Julia didn't have experience with children who had special needs, she began observing Ethan closely. It wasn't something she planned. It just happened. She started noticing patterns. When she walked into a room, there was a pause in his stillness. Sometimes he sat a little straighter or moved his hand slightly. She wondered if he could hear her steps or feel the shift in the air. Maybe he recognized her scent or the sound of her clothes. Whatever it was, he seemed more aware of her presence than anyone had mentioned. Julia didn't say anything to the other workers or to Mr. Hale. She kept these thoughts to herself, but she couldn't ignore them. Every day, she saw something new. Some tiny sign that Ethan was paying attention in his own way. These moments made her feel something she hadn't expected, an interest, maybe even a quiet connection forming slowly between her and the boy. Julia's work continued as normal. She cleaned the same rooms, followed the same schedule, and stayed quiet, just like she had been told. But now, her routine included silent observations. Whenever she passed by Ethan, she moved a little more slowly. She watched to see if he would turn his head again, or lift his fingers, or shift on the couch. And most of the time, he did. Julia started to feel a quiet responsibility toward him. She didn't speak to him yet, and she didn't try to change anything in his daily life, but she began adjusting her actions. She avoided loud sounds. She placed objects down gently. She walked softly, not because the house required it, but because she wanted Ethan to feel safe. The more she watched him, the more she noticed how sensitive he was to his surroundings. It wasn't just about being blind. It was like he was listening and feeling everything more deeply than most people did. Without meaning to, Julia found herself becoming more involved. She didn't cross any lines. She was still just a maid in a big, quiet house, but inside her, something had shifted. She had come to the mansion to escape her pain, to hide from the past. But now, part of her wanted to understand this boy who never spoke and hardly moved. She didn't know what he felt or thought, but she believed he was more aware than he seemed, and that made her care. She didn't try to talk to him or get close in a personal way. She only observed and adjusted her own behavior. Yet those small changes meant a lot. To her, they were a new beginning. And maybe, in some quiet way, they meant something to Ethan too. Julia wasn't looking for healing anymore. Now she was looking for signs, small, silent signs that the boy in the chair by the fire was not as distant as he appeared. Several months before Julia began working at the mansion, Richard Hale had attended a charity event organized by some of his business partners. He rarely went to public events since his wife passed away, but on this occasion, he decided to attend. It was at this event that he met Vanessa Clark. From the beginning, she showed a strong interest in Ethan's story. She listened carefully when Richard spoke about his son's condition and daily life. Vanessa responded with sympathy and understanding, even suggesting some names of therapists and experts she had heard about. She also mentioned her involvement in social causes and how she admired people who cared for children with special needs. Her attention made Richard feel heard during a time when he still carried a lot of sadness. He had been alone with his grief and the weight of caring for Ethan. And now here was someone who seemed to want to understand his life. This led to the start of a new relationship between them. As time passed, Richard and Vanessa grew closer. She began to visit the mansion more often, always expressing her interest in Ethan's life and routine. She said she wanted to know the house better and understand the environment in which Ethan lived. Richard allowed her to visit freely because he believed it was good for Ethan to have someone else around. He thought the presence of another adult could bring a sense of normal life to the house. Vanessa paid attention to every part of the mansion: Ethan's room, the garden, the living areas. She asked many questions and often commented on what could be helpful for Ethan's development. Richard appreciated her enthusiasm. He felt comforted by her presence and started to imagine that she might become a more permanent part of their lives. The idea of forming a new family began to grow in his mind. He hoped that with Vanessa's support, things would feel less heavy and more stable at home. However, the staff at the mansion started to notice things that Richard didn't. Vanessa often insisted on participating in tasks involving Ethan, even when there was no need. She would offer to help with feeding him, even though she didn't know how. She joined walks in the garden, walking beside Richard and Ethan, sometimes trying to guide Ethan herself. She would also ask to help during Ethan's morning routine, like preparing his warm milk or sitting nearby while he ate. Although she said she wanted to be close to the boy and form a bond, the workers saw that she didn't have experience or training for this kind of care. Her actions didn't seem natural, and sometimes they made Ethan uncomfortable. Still, Vanessa kept repeating that she only wanted to help. She explained that since she and Richard were thinking about a future together, she needed to form a connection with Ethan as soon as possible. She believed that if they were to become a family, the bond had to start now. Even though her efforts seemed a little forced, Vanessa's presence became more regular in the mansion. She would arrive early and leave late, sometimes spending the whole day there. She would sit with Richard during lunch and ask about Ethan's progress. She offered to plan new activities, even though she didn't always know how to carry them out. She spoke about family life, structure, and how a strong routine could help children like Ethan. Richard listened and agreed. He believed that Vanessa's involvement was a sign of commitment, and he welcomed it. He wanted to believe that she truly cared. To him, she brought something different to the house, something active and focused. He was used to silence and caution. Vanessa was louder, more direct, and always had ideas to share. Richard thought this might be the change they needed. He believed Vanessa could bring not only emotional support, but also structure to his life and to Ethan's routine. The people who worked in the mansion, however, stayed cautious. They didn't say anything directly to Richard, but they exchanged quiet looks whenever Vanessa took part in something. To them, she seemed too eager. She often acted like she knew what was best, even when she didn't. Still, they followed orders and allowed her to help when Richard approved. Over time, the staff learned to work around her presence. They tried not to interfere when she was around. If she wanted to take part in Ethan's breakfast or help with his walks, they stepped back. They didn't agree with everything she did, but they respected Richard's trust in her. Vanessa behaved as if she was already part of the family, and Richard treated her that way. Her opinions became important in the house, and her suggestions were taken seriously. The mansion, once a quiet and closed space, began to feel different, busier, more active, and with new energy brought by Vanessa's constant involvement. Richard believed that Vanessa's commitment was genuine. He thought her desire to help with Ethan showed that she was ready to be a partner, not just to him, but also in raising his son. He was tired of being alone in the effort to care for Ethan. Even though Ethan had not responded much to Vanessa's presence, Richard hoped that over time, things would improve. He believed that relationships took time to grow and that Vanessa was willing to invest that time. In his mind, the possibility of a new family was real. He imagined a life where Ethan could have more support and he could share the responsibilities with someone who understood. Vanessa's willingness to be part of the routine gave him hope. He thought that together they could build something stronger. For Richard, Vanessa's arrival was a turning point. It was the start of a new chapter where he no longer had to carry everything on his own. As the days went by, Vanessa became more involved in the daily life of the mansion. She began to take part in small tasks around the house, especially those connected to Ethan's morning routine. Without anyone asking her, she started preparing Ethan's warm milk each morning, just before his sensory activities. This task had been done by the staff before, but Richard didn't seem to mind the change. In fact, he saw it as a good sign. To him, it showed that Vanessa cared and was trying to help. She always made sure the milk was warm and ready on time. Richard took this as a gesture of love and responsibility. Since he wanted Vanessa to feel part of the family, he welcomed her interest and didn't ask many questions. The staff adjusted quietly to this change, doing their work while Vanessa prepared the drink. Everything appeared normal on the surface, and Vanessa acted as if this role was naturally hers from the beginning. Julia, however, started to notice something different. She had no problem with Vanessa helping around the house, but one detail caught her attention. Each time Vanessa prepared Ethan's milk, she would take a small bottle out of her purse. She did this quickly and carefully, as if it were nothing important. At first, Julia didn't think much of it. She assumed it might be some kind of vitamin or supplement that a doctor had recommended for Ethan. Since no one mentioned anything unusual, she continued her work as usual. But over time, Julia noticed a strange pattern. After drinking the milk that Vanessa prepared, Ethan often became more tired and less active than usual. He would sit quietly for longer periods and respond less to the usual activities. His reactions became slower, and he sometimes seemed distant. Julia didn't say anything at first, but she began watching more closely, trying to understand if there was a connection. During the afternoons, while Richard focused on work matters in his office, Vanessa would walk freely through the mansion. She made herself present in all areas of the house. She greeted the employees and often asked how things were going. Her tone was always polite, but there was something firm in the way she spoke. She didn't give orders directly, but her words carried weight. The staff understood that she was no longer just a visitor. She was becoming someone with influence in the house. Some of the workers began to follow her instructions or ask her before making small decisions, especially if they thought it might affect Richard or Ethan. Vanessa seemed to like this new position. She never missed a chance to show that she was involved in the house's daily life. She spoke as if she had always been part of it. Julia watched all of this carefully, not interfering, but noticing every detail. Julia kept her distance. She continued doing her job, sticking to the routine, but her mind was alert. She didn't confront Vanessa or speak to Richard about her suspicions. Instead, she paid attention to everything. She noted how Ethan acted differently after drinking the milk that Vanessa gave him. She compared his behavior on the days when someone else prepared the drink. The difference was small but clear. On those days, Ethan seemed a bit more awake and aware. Julia also observed how Vanessa behaved with the staff. She noticed that Vanessa often tried to build trust with them, talking about future plans and giving advice about how to improve Ethan's care. It was always done with a smile, but Julia could see that Vanessa was slowly changing the way things worked in the house. The atmosphere was different now. It was quieter, but in a tense way. Julia felt that something was changing, and not all of it seemed right. Ethan's reactions also started to show a clear pattern, at least to Julia. When Vanessa was in the room, he was usually more still. He didn't move as much or respond to voices and sounds the same way. When Vanessa wasn't around, he showed small signs of interest in his surroundings. He would lift his head a bit when hearing sounds or reach out slowly when touched. Julia was not a doctor, but she'd spent enough time near Ethan to notice these small differences. She didn't know what the small bottle was or what it contained, but she couldn't ignore the way Ethan changed after drinking the milk. Julia understood that she had to be careful. Speaking too soon could cause problems, especially if she was wrong. But in her heart, she felt that something needed to be watched closely. So she continued to observe, quietly keeping track of the things that others didn't seem to see. Every day, Julia repeated her tasks as expected. She kept a calm expression and acted the same as always, but she was more alert than ever. She made mental notes of every time Vanessa reached into her bag. She counted the minutes it took for Ethan to become drowsy after drinking his milk. She looked for patterns in his behavior, comparing one day to the next. She also watched how Vanessa treated the staff, how she spoke with Richard, and how she presented herself as part of the family. Julia didn't draw attention to herself. She didn't try to challenge Vanessa or ask questions. Instead, she collected information slowly, carefully, and without making any mistakes. To everyone else, she was just another quiet worker doing her job. But inside, Julia was focused. She knew that watching and waiting was the only thing she could do for now. She needed to be sure before saying anything, and until then, she kept observing everything. In the early hours of a quiet morning, Julia entered the living room to collect a few toys that had been left scattered near the couch. She expected to find the room empty, but instead, she saw Vanessa sitting right beside Ethan. The boy was holding his cane in one hand while resting the other on his lap, waiting for his usual morning drink. From Julia's position near the doorway, she had a clear view of what was happening. She watched as Vanessa took a small brown bottle from her purse with a practiced movement, as if she had done it many times before. Without hesitation, Vanessa opened the bottle and poured a dark liquid into Ethan's milk. She mixed it with slow, careful motions, then handed the cup to the boy with a gentle smile. Ethan lifted the drink toward his mouth, unaware of anything unusual. Julia stopped moving, frozen in place. Her heart raced as she realized exactly what she had witnessed. Vanessa continued speaking in a soft voice, acting entirely calm. She told Ethan that the mixture would help him stay more relaxed, saying it with a tone that sounded almost sweet. To anyone else, it might have seemed like a caring moment, but to Julia, the scene felt wrong. She kept her hand over her mouth, trying not to make a sound that could reveal her shock. Julia had suspected something strange for days, but seeing the action with her own eyes affected her deeply. She stood still, half hidden behind a piece of furniture, not knowing whether to step forward or leave quietly. She didn't want to cause a scene, yet she also felt she could not ignore what she had just seen. Her thoughts were racing and she tried to stay calm. All she could do was watch, unsure of the right choice in that moment. Vanessa soon noticed Julia's presence. Her eyes shifted toward the maid, and for a brief second her expression changed, as if she had been caught doing something she didn't want anyone to see. Still, Vanessa reacted with confidence. She closed the bottle quickly and slipped it back into her purse, then smiled as if nothing unusual had happened. She calmly explained that the liquid was just vitamins meant to help Ethan. Her tone was steady, almost rehearsed, and she behaved as though there was no reason for concern. Julia did not answer. She didn't nod or question anything. She simply stayed silent, observing every detail. She watched Vanessa's posture, the speed of her movements, and the way she tried to remain in control of the situation. Julia didn't want to confront her without being sure, but she also couldn't pretend she hadn't witnessed something disturbing. So she kept her thoughts to herself, storing the moment carefully in her memory. After handing Ethan the drink, Vanessa gently encouraged him to finish it. Ethan, unaware of anything happening around him, lifted the cup and drank slowly. Julia paid close attention to him. She knew Ethan's usual behavior and the way he typically reacted after his morning milk, but this time she noticed changes almost immediately. Ethan's posture shifted as he drank. His shoulders relaxed in an unnatural way, and his grip on the cane became weaker. His breathing seemed slower, and his expression grew duller, as if a heavy tiredness had washed over him. Within minutes, Ethan seemed far less aware of the room. Julia watched closely, her worry growing stronger. She knew these signs well. They were the same ones she had observed on previous mornings when Vanessa prepared the drink. Now, seeing the liquid added with her own eyes, the pattern felt undeniable. The room grew quieter as Ethan's energy dropped. He responded less to the small sounds around him, the movement of chairs, the distant footsteps in the hallway, or the soft music playing from the speaker nearby. Usually, Ethan reacted to sounds, even in small ways. Sometimes he turned his head slightly or shifted his hand. But now, he sat almost motionless, as though wrapped in a heavy fog. Vanessa continued acting as if everything was normal, brushing a bit of dust from her clothes and adjusting her seat on the couch. She didn't seem bothered by Ethan's sudden change. Julia, on the other hand, felt a tightness in her chest. Her instincts warned her that something was very wrong. She kept her gaze on Ethan, trying to understand how quickly the effect had taken hold. Each new detail strengthened the alarm growing inside her. Julia left the room without saying a single word. She didn't want Vanessa to sense her fear or suspicion. Instead, she walked slowly down the hallway, her thoughts heavy, her heart beating fast. She replayed the scene in her mind over and over again. The bottle, the dark liquid, Vanessa's excuse, and Ethan's sudden weakness. Everything fit together too perfectly to be ignored. She knew she needed to stay calm and continue observing, just as she had done before. But now her concern was stronger than ever. She had seen what happened, and she had seen Ethan's reaction with her own eyes. Julia couldn't forget it. She couldn't pretend it was nothing. She carried that morning with her, knowing it marked a turning point. She had to be alert, careful, and ready for whatever might come next. Julia couldn't forget what she had seen. From that day on, she paid much closer attention to Ethan, especially during the times when Vanessa was not in the room. Julia didn't speak about her concerns to anyone, but inside, she felt that something was wrong. She started to observe Ethan quietly while she went about her regular tasks. Without the drink prepared by Vanessa, Ethan's behavior seemed different. Julia began to notice small changes in his reactions. He appeared more aware of the world around him. If someone walked into the room or made a sound nearby, he would sometimes turn his head slightly. There were days when he seemed more alert, more connected to his surroundings. Julia didn't want to jump to conclusions, but these small reactions felt important. She became more focused on tracking these changes, thinking that they might be connected to the drink Vanessa was giving him in the mornings. Slowly, she started forming a plan to test her theory. One day, something happened by accident that gave Julia a new idea. While she was near Ethan, her phone's flashlight turned on without warning. She didn't mean to do it, but as soon as the light came on, she saw Ethan blink and move his eyes slightly in the direction of the light. The reaction was small but clear. Julia stood still, surprised. Could Ethan actually respond to light? She needed to be sure it wasn't just a coincidence. So in the following days, she began to carry out small, quiet tests when Vanessa wasn't nearby. She would shine the light in different directions, sometimes directly toward Ethan's face, other times from the side. Each time she changed the strength of the light and how long it stayed on. And each time she watched Ethan's response carefully. He would blink, squint, or move his eyes. Sometimes he turned his head just a little. These reactions gave Julia hope and also more concern. Julia kept her actions discreet. She didn't want anyone to notice what she was doing. She chose moments when she was alone with Ethan, or when others were too busy to pay attention. Her tests weren't big or obvious. They were simple and silent, but they gave her valuable information. She realized that Ethan was more aware than most people believed. And the most important detail was this: his reactions were stronger on the days when he had not taken the drink from Vanessa. That made the difference even more alarming. Julia began to take notes. She wrote down the exact times she did each test, what kind of light she used, and how Ethan reacted. She made sure to keep everything organized and hidden. She didn't want to raise suspicion or cause trouble before she had enough proof. At the same time, she started tracking when Vanessa prepared the drinks and how Ethan behaved afterward. Over time, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Julia's notes showed a clear connection between the drink Vanessa gave and Ethan's behavior afterward. On the days he drank it, Ethan became more passive. His reactions were slower or didn't happen at all. He barely moved or responded to anything. But when he didn't drink it, his responses came back, even if they were still small. Julia kept comparing these days. She listed the time of day, how long Vanessa stayed near Ethan, and when the drink was given. She also marked how Ethan acted during the hours that followed. She saw that his alertness was always higher when the drink was not involved. These details confirmed what Julia had feared. Something about that liquid was affecting Ethan. And more than that, Vanessa seemed determined to stay close to him and control these moments, no matter what. Julia knew she had to keep watching and keep recording everything. With each new test, Julia grew more confident in her observations. She continued using light as her main method to check Ethan's awareness. Sometimes she used sunlight by opening curtains just a little. Other times, she used the phone flashlight in brief flashes. Ethan responded to all of them in some way. Julia also noticed that he sometimes moved his fingers or shifted his position when he sensed brightness. These movements were not dramatic, but they were signs of awareness. They meant that Ethan could possibly see or at least sense light to some degree. Julia understood the importance of this discovery. If Ethan had been wrongly labeled as completely blind, this changed everything. But what worried her even more was the possibility that Vanessa's actions were keeping these responses hidden. That meant someone was stopping Ethan from showing progress. Julia didn't yet know the full reason, but she felt that the truth needed to come out eventually. Julia's notes became more detailed as the days passed. She organized them by date and added every small detail she could remember. Ethan's facial expressions, how fast he blinked, if his hands moved, and even changes in breathing. She wrote down what kind of light she used, how far it was from him, and what happened after each test. On a separate list, she tracked Vanessa's involvement. She noted the times when Vanessa offered the drink, what she said, and how Ethan looked afterward. With this, Julia had two sets of information that told the same story. On one side, Ethan showed signs of awareness and reaction when left alone. On the other side, Vanessa's drink always led to tiredness and disconnection. Julia didn't know what to do with this information yet, but she knew it was important. She couldn't ignore what she had learned. Quietly and carefully, she continued collecting facts, waiting for the right moment to act. When Vanessa accidentally left her purse in the kitchen, Julia noticed it resting near the counter. She immediately recognized the small brown bottle inside, the same one she had seen Vanessa using during Ethan's morning drinks. Her heart began to race, but she kept her expression calm so no one would notice her concern. When she found herself alone in the kitchen, she quietly reached for the bottle and examined it closely. There was no label, no instructions, and nothing that explained its purpose. Julia knew she needed answers, but she also knew she couldn't ask anyone in the house, so she made a careful decision. She contacted an old colleague from her past work in the health field, someone she trusted. She asked if the liquid could be analyzed without giving many details. Later that day, during a moment when no one was watching, she slipped the bottle into her bag and sent it off for examination. The following days were filled with anxiety for Julia. Every moment she spent in the mansion felt heavier because she was carrying a secret that could change everything. She continued with her work as if nothing was different, but inside she was worried about the test results. She observed Ethan closely each morning, hoping that Vanessa would not notice the missing bottle. Fortunately, Vanessa didn't mention it, perhaps assuming she had misplaced it somewhere in the house. After several days of waiting, Julia finally received the lab report. She read the document carefully, feeling a cold shock spread through her body. The analysis revealed that the liquid contained substances designed to slow down neurological reflexes and weaken eye responses. These effects created symptoms similar to functional blindness and caused deep lethargy. In other words, the substance could suppress natural reactions and make someone appear far less aware than they truly were. Holding the report tightly, Julia knew she couldn't keep this information to herself. She waited for the right moment to approach Richard, choosing a time when he was alone in his office. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly as she handed him the document. Richard took the papers without suspicion, but as he read them, his expression changed. Shock, confusion, and pain crossed his face. He read the report again, as if hoping it would say something different the second time. Julia stayed quiet, letting him process what he had learned. Richard had trusted Vanessa deeply. He believed she cared for Ethan and wanted to be part of their family. Now he was being told that she had been giving the boy a substance that directly affected his health and behavior. It was hard for him to accept. The truth felt personal, heavy, and deeply unsettling. For several minutes, he didn't speak, only stared at the paper in disbelief. Eventually, Richard confronted Vanessa. He approached the conversation with the report in hand, demanding an explanation for the substance found in her bottle. Vanessa reacted with surprise, then quickly tried to justify her actions. She claimed that the liquid had been recommended by one of Ethan's old doctors, someone she said had experience with his condition. She argued that the goal was to help Ethan remain calm and comfortable during the day. But when Richard asked for documentation or prescriptions, she had nothing to offer. She avoided giving direct answers and grew defensive, insisting that she had only wanted to help. Her excuses did little to calm Richard. He realized that her story was inconsistent and lacked proof. He felt betrayal not only for himself, but for Ethan, who had depended entirely on the adults around him for protection. The trust he had placed in Vanessa was suddenly shattered. Because of what he had learned, Richard took immediate action. He told Vanessa she was no longer allowed to take part in Ethan's routines. She was not to prepare food, offer drinks, or assist with any of his activities. Her access to the boy was fully suspended. The decision was firm and left no room for discussion. Richard returned to Ethan's care with renewed attention, determined to ensure that nothing harmful would reach him again. He also knew that he needed professional guidance, so he arranged an appointment with an independent specialist who could evaluate Ethan's condition without any influence from past assumptions. Julia watched these decisions unfold quietly, grateful that Richard had taken her concerns seriously. Although the situation was tense, she felt relief knowing Ethan was now safer than before. The independent specialist conducted several tests with Ethan, observing his reactions to light, sound, and movement. Ethan showed signs of partial vision, something that had been suppressed before. The doctor explained that a chemical compound in his system had interfered with his natural responses, but as the substance decreased, Ethan's abilities became clearer. This confirmed everything Julia had suspected. Richard listened carefully, feeling a mix of anger, sadness, and hope. For the first time in years, there was proof that Ethan's condition had been misunderstood. The possibility of improvement was real. The specialist advised continued observation and recommended a new plan of care. Richard left the appointment determined to protect his son with more vigilance than ever. Though shaken by what had happened, he now had clarity and a renewed commitment to giving Ethan the chance he deserved. After Richard discovered the truth about the substance and its effects on Ethan, he made a firm decision. Vanessa was immediately removed from the mansion. She was told not to return, and all contact with the family was cut off. There were no exceptions. Richard did not allow her to visit or even speak to anyone in the house. Her access to Ethan was fully blocked. This action was not only emotional, but also necessary. Richard had to protect his son. He felt betrayed and disappointed, but above all, he knew that Ethan's safety had to come first. Vanessa's absence was noticed by everyone in the house, and although some were surprised, no one questioned Richard's decision. At the same time, he began a formal investigation. He hired lawyers to look into Vanessa's background, financial records, and personal connections. The goal was to find out if there was a bigger reason behind her actions, something more than just poor judgment or misunderstanding. He wanted facts, not guesses. The legal team worked quietly but effectively. They dug through Vanessa's past and found documents that raised serious concerns. Among these documents were financial records showing she had signed contracts linked to insurance and trust funds. These contracts were structured in a way that would benefit other individuals, not members of the Hale family, if Ethan remained in a condition that required long-term care. This discovery shocked Richard even more. It suggested that there might have been a financial motivation behind her interest in keeping Ethan passive and dependent. The information added a new level of seriousness to the situation. Richard collected all the evidence he could find. He organized the report from the lab, copies of messages exchanged between him and Vanessa, as well as the small bottle itself. With the help of his lawyers, he prepared everything to present to the proper authorities. He wanted a full investigation by people who could take legal action if needed. While the legal process moved forward, Richard stayed focused on Ethan's care. He didn't let the situation distract him from his son's needs. After Ethan was evaluated by the independent specialist, the medical team gave a clear recommendation: daily visual stimulation. The doctors believed that Ethan's vision, though limited, could improve with the right activities. They suggested a plan that involved light tracking, object interaction, and shape recognition. Julia, who had been by Ethan's side throughout the difficult times, became an important part of this new phase. She followed the plan closely and supported Ethan in each session. She helped guide his hands, moved light sources slowly for him to follow, and used objects with bold colors and clear edges. Her approach was patient and steady, and she paid attention to every small reaction Ethan had. She didn't rush the process, knowing that real progress takes time. Every small step mattered. Soon, small signs of progress began to appear. Ethan started reacting more clearly to strong light. When Julia moved a flashlight in front of him, he followed it with his eyes. He could also recognize dark shapes placed against light backgrounds. Over time, he began reaching out to touch objects with bright colors or high contrast. He didn't always get it right, but the effort was visible. These simple actions, which once seemed impossible, now gave everyone in the house a sense of hope. The exercises became part of Ethan's daily routine, and Julia adjusted the activities to match his pace. She kept notes, tracked his reactions, and made sure the tasks stayed consistent. Richard also began to join some of the sessions. He watched Ethan closely and started to see signs of awareness that had been hidden before. The change was slow, but steady. Each week, Ethan showed a little more interest, a little more movement, and a little more connection with the world around him. The atmosphere inside the mansion began to change. For a long time, the house had been quiet, almost too quiet. Many moments had been filled with worry, sadness, and uncertainty. But now, with the new exercises and Ethan's small signs of progress, there was more movement and energy. The rooms that once felt empty were now used for activities. Light tools, visual toys, and tracking cards became part of everyday life. The staff also noticed the difference. People spoke a little more, moved around with more purpose, and felt hopeful about Ethan's progress. Julia stayed focused, but even she smiled more. Richard, though still serious, showed more emotion when he saw Ethan respond. The whole house seemed to shift. It didn't mean the situation was easy, but now there was direction. There was a plan, a goal, and most importantly, results. The house was no longer stuck in silence. It was beginning to move forward. Although the investigation into Vanessa's actions was still ongoing, Richard knew he had already taken the most important steps. He had protected Ethan, removed a harmful influence, and followed through with medical guidance. Now, with the help of Julia and the new therapy plan, Ethan had a real chance to improve. Richard remained involved in every part of the process. He checked reports, spoke with doctors, and made sure all steps were taken carefully. Julia, too, stayed committed, making sure Ethan had support, attention, and care each day. The experience had changed them all. Trust, once broken, was now being rebuilt slowly. Not with words, but through actions and progress. The focus was not on the past anymore. Everyone in the house was looking at what came next, giving Ethan the chance to grow, to respond, and maybe one day to live without the limits that had been unfairly placed on him for so long. The work had just begun. With all the evidence collected and organized, Richard finally took the case to the authorities. He brought the lab report, the financial documents, the small brown bottle, and the messages exchanged with Vanessa. He also included detailed notes that Julia had shared with him, showing the changes in Ethan's behavior with and without the substance. Once the case was formally presented, the authorities began a criminal investigation against Vanessa. The charges included administering a harmful substance and attempting to manipulate the boy's medical condition for possible personal or financial benefit. The seriousness of the accusations caught the attention of the investigators, who moved quickly to begin their work. Everything had to be checked carefully: witness accounts, medical evidence, and the possible long-term effects on Ethan's health. Richard cooperated fully with the investigation, answering questions, sharing documents, and making sure the truth came to light. It was a difficult process emotionally, but he was determined to protect his son and make sure justice was served. The case soon reached the media. News outlets picked up the story of a young boy who had been wrongly assumed to be completely blind and had been given a mysterious substance by someone close to the family. Headlines began to appear, and the public became interested in the story of Ethan Hale. Journalists focused on how the situation had been discovered, how the father had acted once he knew the truth, and how the woman involved was now facing legal consequences. The media also covered the medical findings, especially the part about how the substance had masked Ethan's reactions and made it appear that he had no vision at all. The story spread quickly, especially because it involved a wealthy and well-known family. People were shocked, and many expressed concern over how such a thing could happen. The attention put more pressure on the investigation, but it also helped to raise awareness about the importance of proper medical care and oversight. As part of the legal process, Julia was asked to testify. She appeared at the proper location to give her statement, explaining everything she had observed during her time working at the mansion. Julia spoke clearly and carefully, describing what she had seen the day Vanessa poured the liquid into Ethan's drink. She also shared her personal notes, the records of Ethan's behavior on different days, how he responded to light and objects, and how things changed when the drink was not involved. Her testimony was calm, but powerful. She explained how she had tested Ethan's visual reactions and how the signs of awareness were always stronger without the substance. The officials listened closely and asked for more details. Julia answered every question, giving the full picture of what had happened. Her account was important because it was based on direct observation and consistent documentation. It added credibility to the case and showed that the problem had not just been a medical mistake, but a repeated and deliberate act. The medical experts involved in the investigation confirmed what Julia and Richard had already suspected. After conducting independent exams, the specialists concluded that Ethan had always had some level of visual ability. He wasn't fully blind, but his responses were extremely low when the substance was present in his system. Once the substance was completely removed, his responses became stronger and more consistent. These findings matched everything Julia had noticed. The specialists explained that the substance affected the nervous system, slowing down reflexes and reducing eye movement. In Ethan's case, it had hidden his real condition. Without the interference, his limited vision could now be used as a starting point for therapy and development. This medical confirmation gave Richard and Julia a stronger foundation to move forward with Ethan's care. It also supported the legal case, proving that the boy's condition had been changed unnaturally through the use of the unauthorized compound. At the same time, Richard began to make changes inside the mansion. He understood that Ethan needed more than just protection. He needed professional support to grow. Richard reorganized the house's structure to focus on recovery and therapy. He hired specialists, including therapists and counselors, who could provide Ethan with the right tools and strategies. A psychologist began working with the boy to help him adjust emotionally to the new environment. The staff received new guidelines to support the therapy sessions and create a more active atmosphere in the house. Julia remained an important part of this new phase, continuing to assist with the visual exercises and documenting Ethan's progress. The mansion, once quiet and heavy with routine, now had scheduled activities, therapy rooms, and more interaction. Everyone worked together to support Ethan's improvement, and the focus was now on giving him the opportunity to use his abilities to the fullest. The story of Ethan's recovery, the discovery of the substance, and the legal case against Vanessa began to spread across the country. It became a national topic. News programs, health magazines, and online platforms all covered the details. Parents and families began discussing similar issues, asking doctors more questions and paying closer attention to the treatments their children were receiving. Some people shared their own stories of questionable therapies or unapproved substances. The case helped raise public awareness about the dangers of using compounds without proper medical supervision. Experts joined the discussion, warning others about how easily children could be harmed if their care was placed in the wrong hands. For Richard, the attention was overwhelming at times, but he stayed focused on Ethan. The most important result was that his son was finally receiving the care he needed. The truth had come out, and now, with careful guidance and continued effort, Ethan had a real chance to grow and improve. With Vanessa officially convicted and the legal process finally closed, Richard was able to turn his full attention back to his son. There were no more court dates, no more documents to sign, and no more legal meetings to attend. That part of their lives was over. Richard knew it was time to focus entirely on Ethan and the future that now seemed more possible than ever. He began to make changes in his own routine, organizing his work schedule so that he could spend more time at home. He reduced travel, delegated tasks at his company, and made sure he was available every day to support Ethan's development. The house was no longer just a place to live. It had become a space for growth and healing. Every room had a purpose now. Therapy sessions, learning activities, and playtimes were all part of Ethan's daily plan. The quiet that once filled the mansion was replaced by gentle sounds of movement, conversation, and the small but steady signs of progress. Ethan continued to follow the visual stimulation program with care and consistency. Each day, he participated in exercises that challenged his sight in safe and structured ways. He practiced identifying bright colors, recognizing large shapes, and tracking slow movements across a table or wall. Julia remained by his side through it all. She guided each activity with patience, adjusting the pace depending on Ethan's mood and energy level. She celebrated his successes, even the smallest ones, because every response mattered. Whether Ethan turned his head toward a light or reached out for a colored object, Julia made sure he knew it was a good step. Over time, his reactions became faster and more confident. He began to respond more often to new objects and showed interest in toys that had once gone untouched. These changes were not fast, but they were steady, and they gave everyone hope. The therapy wasn't just helping his vision, it was helping him connect more with the world around him. Richard noticed the changes in his son and felt deeply moved. For years, he had believed that Ethan's abilities were fixed, limited by a condition that no one could change. Now, he was seeing with his own eyes that his son was capable of learning, exploring, and reacting. Richard made sure to be present during the sessions whenever possible. He wanted Ethan to feel his support and see that his father was there, not just to protect him, but to encourage him. The bond between them grew stronger. They spent time together, not only during therapy, but also during meals, walks, and quiet reading time. The relationship became more than routine. It became meaningful in new ways. Richard also worked with specialists to make sure that Ethan had access to the best resources. He updated parts of the house, brought in educational tools, and built a small therapy area that could be used daily. These actions showed his commitment to giving Ethan a better life. Julia's role in the household became even more central. She was no longer just a housemaid or an observer. She had become a trusted figure in Ethan's development. She created learning activities adapted to his needs, combining visual cues with touch and sound to strengthen his understanding. She introduced picture books with high-contrast images, used toys that made soft sounds, and repeated actions to build familiarity. She also kept detailed records of what worked best for Ethan and shared them with the therapy team. Her presence was calm and constant. Ethan began responding to her more, recognizing her voice, reaching for her hand, and showing signs of comfort when she was near. Julia treated each moment as important, knowing that consistency and repetition were key. She didn't rush results. She focused on helping Ethan feel safe and supported. Her dedication played a major role in Ethan's progress, and Richard was fully aware of how valuable she had become to their new routine. As the months passed, the mansion continued to transform. It no longer felt like a space filled with silence and uncertainty. Instead, it became a place full of activity and purpose. Every part of the house, from the living room to the garden, was used in some way to help Ethan grow. With support from professionals, Richard set up different areas where Ethan could practice walking, exploring, and interacting with objects. Adapted school activities were added to his schedule. These lessons were simple but important, learning through touch, color recognition, and basic matching exercises. Ethan started exploring more parts of the house on his own, guided by his cane and encouragement from Julia and Richard. He also spent time in the garden, where he could feel different textures, hear the sounds of nature, and practice using his senses in a new environment. These new experiences made each day more meaningful. The house felt alive again, and the people inside it had a new sense of purpose. For the first time in years, the family was able to move forward with confidence. The truth about Ethan's condition had changed everything. No longer trapped by misinformation and manipulation, Richard could finally provide the kind of support his son really needed. Julia remained a steady presence, continuing to guide and encourage. Ethan, though still facing challenges, was making real progress, step by step. The atmosphere in the mansion was no longer one of fear or doubt. Instead, it was filled with care, structure, and hope. The routines brought comfort, and the visible changes in Ethan gave everyone strength to keep going. Richard felt peace knowing that they were doing everything possible to give Ethan a good future. The journey was still long, but the hardest part, the part of not knowing, was behind them. Now each day was about growth. Each small success was a reason to keep believing. Together, they were rebuilding not only Ethan's future, but their entire way of living. Finally, we've reached the end of this story. I'm extremely happy that you've made it this far. Thank you very much for watching. Comment below what you thought, and what was the best or worst part. Now that you've finished watching this incredible story, click on my profile picture and access my videos. I'm sure you'll be enchanted by all the good stories about justice and kindness. Enjoy. Don't forget to subscribe. Until next time.